we're told that the queues are still very long, and so hopefully we'll have more people filing in as we go. I'd like to welcome both everyone in the room, but also I'm told we have over 200 people online watching the live stream, so welcome to you all as well, watching from the comfort of your own homes. This is a panel partnership with the CSJ and CAF on philanthropy, but we've called it Backing Britain's Givers, because we want to get into a conversation about actually are we backing Britain's givers, and what is current policy looking like around that. We've got a stellar panel. To my left, Nigel Huddleston, Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. To his left, Philippa Cornish, Director of Client Relations for CAF, the Charities Aid Foundation. To my right, Jadwiga Lee, who leads a brilliant local charity called the New Beginnings Foundation. And to Yad's right, Sir Ian Duncan Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party and founder of the CSJ. What I thought I would do, so the panellists are going to give us sort of a 5-minute opening salvo, and then we'll open up for conversation. I thought I might just set the scene a little bit, because the context of this discussion is the CSJ published Supercharging Philanthropy earlier this year in March, very much with a view to looking at how you can increase philanthropic giving in the UK. And I thought I might just open with a couple of facts and figures from that to sort of set the scene as to where we are in terms of philanthropy in this country. Obviously, charities rely significantly on philanthropy, particularly smaller charities. And by philanthropy, we mean sort of general giving, sort of you and I giving a few quid here and there, but also kind of high net worth individuals giving their money. But in both of those categories, the number of givers is going down. The CAF giving report, which was published recently, found that fewer members of the public than ever are giving to charities. Our Supercharging Philanthropy report showed that philanthropic giving is actually inflated in this country by a smaller and smaller number of high net worth individuals who do give. So in other words, fewer and fewer people, but are giving more. To put that into context, if high net worth individuals gave in the UK at the same rate as their counterparts in America, an additional £18 billion would be released to charities each year. And only a third of the UK's wealthiest give over 1% of their wealth. And when you add to the context of that, things like corporate giving has been going down in this country, and then particularly we've heard stories of trusts and foundations who have paused their giving for various reasons. So just to set the tone really for the context of this conversation, I'm now going to hand over to Nigel Huddleston, and as I say, what we'll do, we'll give each panellist a few minutes opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Nigel, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Nathan, and good morning, everybody. And I'm delighted to be back home at DCMS as the Shadow Secretary of State, because I think, as some of you know, I actually did have the portfolio of Civil Society Minister in government a few years ago. And I really enjoyed it. So this is an area that's quite close to my heart, and it's good to see a few familiar faces in the room today, and I suspect a few online as well. So thank you for your time and attention today, and apologies as well, because I was one of the people stuck in the queue. And no, I tend not to jump. But I actually did say to the guy at the front, I said, sorry, I'm meant to be on a panel now, can you let me through? And he did let me in, so, you know, I hate doing that. But apologies for keeping you all waiting a few minutes. Look, I'd say just a few things, because I'm very keen to hear on you. Look, you all know where we are at the moment. We're at the stage of policy development where we are all ears. You know, we are keen to hear from you about what it is that we should be doing that is in our next manifesto and what we should be developing in terms of policy. So the timing of your report, Nathan, was absolutely fantastic, and there's a lot of really meaningful and important stuff in there. Now, just reflecting on my time when I was Civil Society Minister overseeing the whole charities arena, though, of course, it was also during the pandemic. And we know that not only, there's interesting dynamics what went on there. Giving, actually, I think 2022 is still a record, went up a lot. I mean, the British do give a lot, you know, a very large number give. And it's not just money. I think it's also important to remember as well, volunteering time. And that is a really important part of this mix as well, because, you know, there are so many entities and organisations that would not be able to cope and would not exist if it wasn't for the time given by large numbers of people, and also many institutions and many companies also being quite flexible in giving and allowing people to take time off. And we should be proud about elements of it. Remember, things like the London Marathon is the biggest annual individual charity fundraiser in the world. We just saw an amazing amount of money gifted to the National Gallery, for example. Again, high net worth individuals is an interesting element there I'll come on to in a second. And also, let's not forget, it was a Conservative government under John Major that set up the National Lottery. And the National Lottery also plays a really important part in the mix here, in particular with the Communities Fund and other parts. So there's a lot we do right. And of course, gift aid is a really important part of our mix in the UK. And we did commit in the last manifesto that we would have a review of gift aid. And again, your ideas here and some of the recommendations about making sure it's more digital and the way that we record it is important. Tax and tax incentives play a really important part here as well. And I was Financial Secretary of the Treasury and being lobbied a lot by Lucy. And actually there were a lot of things we were considering in the process and in the run-up to the last election. I think some of them mentioned in your report as well, Nathan. So please do raise the tax issue here and the tax incentives. And there's a lot we can learn from overseas. You know, the US does a really good job at high net worth individuals. And also point where if one person in a certain group starts giving, it tends to have a really positive knock-on impact on others as well. And it can be really, really meaningful to the tune of billions of pounds. So there's a lot we can do. And I say, I'm very keen to hear your views today. But I say we've got to be appreciative of the successes whilst looking at models around the world and other ideas, particularly at tax, particularly at behavioural side. The high net worth individuals is interesting, though, because I think it was in your report or something else. I think it showed that actually, proportionately, in terms of income, it's the lower earners that are more generous. Yeah. And actually, high net worth individuals as a percentage give less than others. So, you know, if we change that by a tiny, tiny proportion, it could make a huge impact. So I'll finish that.
Cool. Thanks, Nigel.
It'll be my mum calling.
Not a high net worth individual.
No, I'm afraid not. She's probably going, oh my God, I can't hear you, your tie's not straight. She's probably watching online.
Yeah, fantastic. Philippa, over to you.
Thanks, Nathan. And thank you for having me here today in Shadow Secretary of State. So I'm Philippa, I'm Director of Client Relations at CAF. CAF is one of the UK's largest charities. Last year, we distributed £1.2 billion on behalf of the donors that we work with. And we exist to make giving easy, straightforward, and we do this by partnering with businesses and with individuals, including high net worths, to make their giving more impactful and more strategic. Because it is a really crucial part of British society. Nathan mentioned the report. Last year, the British public donated £15.4 billion to charity, which is a really, really significant amount. And philanthropy and giving funds so much of the modern innovations we've seen in society, so is a really, really important part. But as acknowledged, it does need to grow. We also work quite closely with charities, providing fundraising tools, advice, donation reporting, and we know from talking to them that the majority are seeing a seriously increased demand on their services. And a quarter of those that are feeling that are worried that they don't have the capacity to meet that demand. So, you know, that's really, really a challenge. And this is against a backdrop. So despite that 15.4 billion, which is brilliant and significant, there are fewer people giving. Last year, only 50% of the British public donated to charity, and that's down from 58% in 2019. So through the pandemic, despite the peak that we did see, we lost 4 million donors. And we really need to find a way to attract them back to giving. And as Nathan mentioned, corporate giving has stagnated too. We just published our corporate giving report that looks at the FTSE and wider business and how they give, and giving is down year on year. What we advocate for at CAF is that businesses should give at least 1% of their pre-tax profit to charity. And there's a calculation that if the FTSE all did that, and a big proportion of wider business, that would unlock over £9 billion that could go to charity, which would definitely help a lot with those feeling that increased demand. But there's definitely things we can do. It's why we exist as a charity, to encourage. And there's definitely things that the government and opposition with their open ears could help us with. 3 things I maybe wanted to just touch on. The first, I think, which is important, particularly in the high net worth space, but also that middle band that do have money, is to work with advisors. They're such a crucial cog in the conversation about philanthropy, and we did some research that showed only 5% of advisors, so I'm talking like financial advisors, tax advisors, feel confident when talking to their clients about giving, and that's understandable. It's a personal, private conversation to have and can come with some tax complexities, but I think it would be great if we could equip these advisors to be able to have these conversations with more confidence, and that would really, we could do something with their CPD, include something in financial qualifications, and that would really help unlock that middle market, those moderately wealthy who can give and want to give and maybe just need some encouragement to do so. The second thing on corporate, just to return briefly on the corporate point, in 2013, the requirement to mandatory report on corporate giving was removed in an amendment to the Companies Act. And I think reinstating that could be really helpful to make businesses really centre and think strategically about their giving. We know those that work in business that often if it's not measured, it can not matter. And so by enshrining it with mandatory reporting alongside the other reporting a corporate can do, this would really be quite powerful and quite a low-cost incentive. And then finally, and you mentioned it, on gift aid. Gift aid is like the envy of many countries. It's a real darling that the UK has, being as it is like a tax benefit that favours the charity rather than the donor. It's a wonderful incentive that we have, introduced, I think, as well by John Major in 1990. But it kind of feels a bit 1990 sometimes dealing with it. It's quite a paper-based process. And so seconding what the Supercharging Philanthropy report says about modernising it, digitising it, removing that barrier. At the moment, over £500 million is left unclaimed in gift aid, just because donors don't tick the box or charities don't have the capacity. It can be a real burden to make that claim. And 180 million is also claimed in error. So maybe some straightforward things we can do there. So tackling the business side and then the individuals with gift aid and then the advisors that serve them, the 3 of those together, I think could really do a lot in unlocking funds.
Brilliant. Philippa, thank you. Jadwiga, I'm going to come to you next, because we sort of don't want to lose the fact that we're talking about policy changes, but actually the point of this is to get money to brilliant small charities like yours. And so from sort of the other side of the table, I want to kind of hear from you a bit about what that's like.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Well, I thought I'd give you a bit of history in terms of where we began, which was in 2018. We were a small community project in Stockport, working with families in the child protection process, families whose children were at risk of significant harm, working closely with Stockport Local Authority. And the aim was to help parents understand why they were parenting in the way that they were, and help them understand how, if they could implement changes through a trauma and attachment-informed approach, then their children could stay safely at home in their care, and we could reunify children who were in care back home. So when we started the project, I had just 4 members of staff, and that included me. We had a turnover of 150,000. We were working with up to 60 parents a year, and that was about, they had collectively 130 children. We operated from a church hall and a community scout hut. Last year in November, we won the 2024 CSJ awards, and from that moment, everything changed. For the first time in 6 years, we have our own building, and within a year, we've expanded and moved next door. So we've got 2 buildings now. We have 12 members of staff, and we have worked with over 130 parents who've collectively got 265 children. And we support now 90 families post-programme. That means we never close a door, so we're always continuing to support our families who've been with us. We've also started a children and young persons service, which means we directly work with the children whose parents have been through the programme. So whilst parents have made significant changes, children have still suffered whilst being in their care when they were in that state of chaos. So those children are now receiving a direct service from us. Last year, we started a new project which was called the Reunification Programme, focusing directly on working with children who are in care, who have been in care for a long period of time, who have probably had multiple placement breakdowns, and who cost the taxpayer a lot of money and the local authority a lot of money. And it's they're the kind of children who want to go home, but have been lost in care because it's felt that they're too complex to return home, that the family won't be able to manage, even if the family have made changes. Because we're a specialist project, we work directly with those children and their parents. And in the space of a year, thanks to philanthropic funding, we've been able to employ specialist staff, and we have reunified 14 out of 15 children. The cheapest placement was 250,000 a year, so it's $250,000, and the most expensive, 450,000 a year. The local authority are currently doing a cost-benefit analysis to see if we've saved them money, but I think it's safe to say we've saved them a significant amount of money. With further philanthropic investment from the Purposeful Ventures, who reached out to us following the CSJ award, we're now going to scale into new local authorities across Greater Manchester, where we will be able to reach more families, more children, and we'll be able to reunify more children. So what I'm trying to say is, thanks to philanthropic funding, we have widened our reach, but we're also saving the country money and the local authority money too.
Very good. Ian.
Well, yeah, that's exactly the point of this discussion, really, is at the bottom end, the work that's taking place. And the one point I want to make, you mentioned the awards. The key when I set the CSJ up really wasn't policy. The key of the CSJ was the Poverty Fighters Alliance, which we've created, which I think is now 800, 900 small community groups and charity, because the frustration, we wrote a paper about this a while back, the frustration was, we called it the Tescoization of charitable giving. And that was that most of the money that was given goes into big charities that do an awful lot of lobbying and everything else, but very little actually, when you identify it, functionally doing stuff that works on the ground. Whereas a lot of the smaller community groups and charities, often not very well known about, they do huge amounts of work. And it was from them that I certainly thought at the time, every time I'd been around and visited them, they were all the most remarkable because they had policy positions that they were actually doing that worked. And it was, how do you get that up to politicians to understand that A, the policy works, and B, we've seen it work. And most importantly, they're the ones that have the greatest struggle to get the money to apply that to work that you're doing, which saves other people money and saves lives. So I congratulate you, but also you are an epitome of what I think is still wrong with the general concept of charitable giving in the UK. So the first things that I would have done, and I think, Naji, you mentioned this earlier on, we have the worst tax position for charitable giving that I can think of. It's the meanest position we are. The truth is, if you go to America, you wonder why so many more of the wealthier people really do give money, because it's worth it to them, first of all, and that's no risk. In other words, they give money, they get a huge write-off. And I've had arguments with governments say, well, you know, but there'll be people giving to things like think tanks. America has big think tanks as well, because policy is, strangely enough, the lifeblood of democracy. So there's a reason why people should give to them as much as they give to charities, but that charity money should go down to the lowest level. So our tax position is terrible. I think the first thing that I would recommend, as and when we head towards government, hopefully, that as we do that, we actually readjust the position on this and show the charities that there's going to be a much greater proportion of the money given will actually go to the charities as necessary. So the first thing is our tax position, I think, needs sorting out. The second thing, when I was in government, I actually spent £20 million from the DWP on projects to prove that social impact bonds actually worked. Yeah. And we did get the proof. And to be fair, Oliver Letwin worked with me at the time. We were going to do a big impact bond for a city, which would have been Manchester at that particular time, but in the end the Treasury, as ever, had no foresight at all and decided we wouldn't be able to do it. But the reality is there is another route how to finance this, to get private finance down to charities on the basis that what they do has been proven to work, that you can then catalogue how that works, and then you can set early, mid and late term checks on whether what the bond is meant to do is being delivered directly as it should be on the ground. So often that when governments are involved in this, what they do is you have a good idea, you say we're going to make that policy work, you goes down one other level and somebody goes, you know what, we've got something else here as well that we could probably add in. So that then changes it. Then you go another level and somebody else modifies that. And the thing that you knew worked no longer is the thing that you're funding. So it would bring a discipline to governments, local government, because you would break the bond. If you break the bond, you have to pay it back. And so that was another, and we did this, and it was working with lots of small community groups and charities. You know, private finance was being engineered to come to it. And I think we should be making a much bigger effort on that. This government doesn't seem to know what it means, but it'd be a good idea if we were able to get that message across. Matched funding. We saw that with the youth zones that John Roberts was keen to do, where you get the local council to put up half, and the other half is done by local, emphasize local businesses. Why is that important? It's important because it locks politicians in the longer term. The problem is when local governments create youth zones, as it were, or youth clubs, they might last 2 years until they get into difficulty, and then they pull the funding on those, because, you know, at the end of the day, what the hell do we care? Really, it's a youth thing, and, well, they'll be all right. When you get private money into it at the same time to match it, you can't do that as a local government, because they're going to sue the hell out of you if you pull the money on the project, because they want their money back. So that locks them in. And the second thing that's really important about that, it then gets commitment wider than the local authority. So now, all of a sudden, what they do is the kids actually own the clubs, and therefore they look after them. No one comes in and trashes one of these clubs because they have ownership. They pay £1 to join. So it's a brilliant idea. The only one problem is getting councils to commit longer term to funding once they put the money up is a difficult one. But I don't know how many there are now. It must be about sort of 30 or so, I think, of these around the country. But they've all succeeded, not one of them has closed. So they're a very good example of how matched funding directly can work. And the local businesses can be encouraged to put something in locally to something they can touch, feel and see, which is this building that is now helping kids after hours. Working on payment by results is also critical to this. So you pay for these things as and when they go through the bars and mark, this is where you're meant to be, you've achieved that, that's your payment for that, we go to the next one, so it's important. And the last bit I would say is on volunteering. We had actually a question yesterday at the panel I was at, actually by a sea cadet who was there. And the problem is, I take my hat off to volunteers. You know, we wouldn't work in this country if we didn't have volunteers giving up their time generously. But the truth is, they're too small in number right now, and what we need is a greater impact from governments to say volunteering is really rewarding. And one of the areas I was just suggesting is that it's not all just about older people who are retired to volunteer. You know, those who are in what we call the sixth form, the last 2 years doing their A-levels, the first year of that, it should be part of their project to volunteer in these organizations to help out. They should get, you know, extra credits or whatever it happens to be on the basis that they've been volunteering. And it's helpful because that will stay with them thereafter. So encouraging volunteering at an earlier age is also important when you're talking about this, and it would benefit all those organizations outside. So regenerating the idea of volunteering, even promoting it, is important, because we have to increase that level of volunteering dramatically. But of course, at the end of the day, if you're going to have the charitable sector being able to take those volunteers, it needs to have some money to make sure that it can actually do what it's supposed to do. And that comes back to the first instance, which government's got to be bold. We've got to say, do you know what? We need now to say to charitable institutions, we are behind you and we're prepared to give you a very, very, very good tax deal on this if you do this. And that, I think, would be the big game changer. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think I might open it straight up. Who's got questions they'd like to ask any of the panellists, or generally? If not, I will kick us off with a few questions.
Or comments.
Or comments. Yeah, lady at the front here, there is a microphone coming.
I was planning to ask this a bit later in the panel, so it's slightly half-formed thought. But so my name's Charlotte Stevens. I work for PBE, which was formerly known as Pro Bono Economics. We use economics to support small and medium frontline charities to better use their data so that they can articulate and measure their impact more effectively. This question really comes from me on a personal, professional level. So I'm Director of Development. My background is in fundraising and income generation. I've worked for small charities most of my career. And I think that there is a cultural problem, that there is a big difference between the level of education and the level of power that particularly high net worth philanthropists have in the charitable sector. And when I say education, I mean an understanding, a critical understanding of the complexity of the social issues that organisations like New Beginnings are dealing with, and also an understanding of the challenges of running a small organisation, a non-profit organisation specifically. And I think, you know, those kind of funders are coming into the room with a huge amount of power because they've got the cash and they might give it to you. But also they're used to being powerful. You know, if you're talking about wealthy people, they're used to being very important, well-respected, listened to people in the room. And I'd just be really interested in the insights of the panel on that from your different perspectives. And also any thoughts you have about how we can better bring the cultures of high net worth philanthropy or large-scale philanthropy together with grassroots and frontline charities so that we can make, as well as there being better incentives to give, but also make that giving more intelligent and a better fit. And so small organisations like Jadwigas don't have to spend huge amounts of money and bend themselves into all sorts of contortionist positions in order to please funders and extract the funding that they need to do a really vital service. Thank you.
Thank you. Nigel, you're furiously making notes. Do you want to jump in on that?
Look, you raise a lot of things there, and I don't have the answers here, but I'm really keen to hear from you, because I think this raises as well, to a degree. Look, most people who are involved in charities, who give to charities or indeed work in charities, either paid or voluntary, are doing so for a noble purpose. They want to make the world or their local community a better place. Some, it's a tax thing, pure and simple, or some influence. What it raises here is the role and purpose of governance and the structure of certain organisations, and also, importantly, the role of the Charities Commission here as well. And I've heard a very wide range of views on the Charities Commission, and genuinely keen to, over the next few months and years, hear views, because sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. Sometimes they get heavily involved in a tiny charity that doesn't have an issue, and then completely miss really major issues in some of the big areas. So I'd say I think there's something here about what is the remit and purpose of the Charities Commission, and looking at governance structures in quite a fundamental way. So I don't have the answers, but I think you raised really, really important points there across a whole spectrum of issues. Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. I'm really lucky because I would say I've got two mentors that have helped me navigate this new terrain. And it's new terrain. I didn't understand what philanthropy involved a year ago. And you're right, there are different philanthropists and they have different levels of involvement. And I've been on a journey. But I would say that thank you to the CSJ. I've got Kavika, who's our area rep. He's acted like a mentor and supported me on that journey. And then there's also Josh from Purposeful Ventures. And I think that they've helped me understand what role I play, and I think I was saying to you earlier, it's about keeping my eye on our values and ensuring that I don't sway too much to please the philanthropist, so that they get what it is that they hope we do for them and for our community, but it's not necessarily something that we think is important or necessarily aligned with their values. And I think it's about keeping a focus on that, but having the courage. I was talking about courage earlier as well, and that I'm supported in that journey through mentors. But I'm lucky because without those mentors, I don't think I would be able to say what I'm saying right now. I would be a bit lost and confused. So I think the role of a mentor is very important.
Yeah. I think it's a really relevant point and rings true with some of the advisory work that we do with donors. And often we are there to encourage that really community local lens on something, not just to consider big charities for certain problems, and also the importance of like phasing funding and understanding really what it's designed to do. A lot of high net worths, though, do have trustee roles. Talking about volunteering, that's like a really key role for somebody in that position, and I think that gives them a lot of experience and understanding and can bring them closer to charities. And I think just back to the point I made in the introduction with the advisor, I think if financial advisors understand a bit the sensitivities of the sector and the different, and there's 160,000 plus charities in the UK. Not all of them are equal. Some are fighting systemic challenge, some are dealing with very, very local, hyper-local important problems. And I think having that understanding and the different ways that funding can help, and that being part of that sort of conversation will also really help with that potential imbalance of power.
Great.
It is, in fact, one of the, worth saying, one of the roles that the Poverty Fighter Alliance is about, is being able to help them to understand this as well. And that was the whole point about getting back to it. And that should be on a much wider scale. I mean, you've talked about what you guys are doing as well, but it should be even wider than that, really, in a sense. You know, if you are trying to run a charity and go after money, you do need to know the pitfalls of it and everything else. And I think it's one of the problems that puts off charities from growing a little bit, is they're worried that they won't be able to manage it. So certainly that's a critical issue to stop the growth of charities, just like small businesses, really, in a way. That's what stifles the growth of small businesses as well.
Great. Another question. There's a hand at the back that I saw go up, right at the back. Oh, I can't see the face. There we go.
Hi, thanks very much for your contributions. My name is Matthew. I'm co-CEO at Trussell, the food bank charity. We have distributed over the course of the last 5 years almost £100 million in grants to our food bank members who are part of the Trussell community. I'm interested in this dynamic between large charities and small charities, and whether large charities, particularly in a kind of federated structure or a membership structure, can be useful mechanisms for channeling and directing funding to the front line, and how we can better work with philanthropists on that kind of level, notwithstanding some of the critique of large charities.
Great. Philip, I might come to you first on that.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a really interesting point of the combining different powers of the small charity and the large charity. And there's definitely a lot of potential there of balancing the local knowledge and insight with some of the structure that a larger charity can have. And we definitely see that. And obviously with the merge with Felix project, you can see how that's coming to life for you as well. So, yeah.
I mean, Ian mentioned in his previous answer the alliance of charities that we have at the CSJ, over 800 of them. When we set up the CSJ Foundation 4 years ago, we looked at the kind of total income flows into the charity sector, and perhaps it won't be a surprise to many people in this room, but when you look at income going to UK charities, 85% goes to just 4% of charities. There's this kind of, obviously, kind of huge kind of mismatch in terms of what the smaller charities are kind of fighting over in terms of, you know, philanthropy and high net worth giving versus the big charities. So there is this kind of imbalance. I'm interested in your point. You're talking about maybe using the larger charities to help distribute a little bit. Jadwiga, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's never happened to me, so I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question. I've not been in that partnership. No one's ever reached out to me to talk about that.
Let me just come back to the Trussell Trust formula. As I recall, Trussell Trust's basis of how they work is you've absorbed over the period some existing charities that were church charities or whatever doing food banks and brought them into your structure. So your base was kind of already building there. You've added obviously others, but my point is that you didn't start something and kept it at the top. It was always about what was going on at the bottom, and you were organised. So in a way, it does work, your model, but it started like that. The problem that you're touching on with the amount of funding that goes to such a small number of charities is so often when you go and look at some of those really big charities that everybody knows, that you cannot discover what the mechanism is once they get the money for small groups down at the bottom to actually then, that might be in their line of interest, how are they going to be able to do it? Because they're not doing it at the top. They've got lots of people involved, they've got good payment for them. But when you get to figure out where the money has gone, you actually find that it doesn't actually go too often for action on the ground, but a lot of the time it gets involved when there's going to government to demand changes in government policy quite a lot of time. And the endless times we get lobbied by charities like that, and, okay, that's fine. But my problem is, where's the action on the ground? And when we deal with charities like yours and organisations like that are really changing lives on the ground, you want to ask the question, well, why is it that they struggle so much to get the money? Often charities that you could live 4 streets away from and you wouldn't know existed. So because they're all busy working, doing what they're meant to do, not have the time to say to everybody, we're here, and you can't spend extra money on advertising. So there is a requirement for a breakdown in the structure that I think every large charity, because the ones we're talking about, should have a requirement to declare to the Charity Commission how much and what proportion of their money actually ended up with people doing something on the ground in line with their objectives, but changing lives for that particular reason. And I can think of so many charities we know that have got lots of cash now being invested in various properties and others because they get a lot of donations, but that money, a chunk of it should actually end up down here with small community groups and charities, and it's important to bring that down. I think that would help enormously in the action that takes place on the ground. As I say, your structure was already sort of like that, but lots of big charities are not.
Nigel.
Yeah, I think there's, if you think about the role and purpose of many charities, they go from basically providing an absolute necessary, much needed service, which if it did not exist and was provided by the charity, the taxpayer would have to pick up and be delivered, through government, either local or national. And as part of that process then, many of the larger ones in particular also have a lobbying role, which is perfectly legitimate on policy. And then there are other charities which are just straightforward lobbying on policy. And again, all of that is perfectly legitimate as long as it's transparent. I think the role of some of the larger charities, including Trussell Trust actually, they can really influence policy because they're able to gather data and information in a really credible way and therefore present not just a compelling argument or a sob story, but actually really good, meaningful, hard evidence. And Ian and I both know if you go into the Treasury, if you're going to make any argument, you need the data, you need the numbers, you need the information. And therefore there is an additional role for some of the larger charities to actually be responsible in terms of lobbying and providing that information and data on behalf of other charities that probably don't have the capability, resources and skills to do so as well.
Great. Gentleman just there.
I'd like to get a bit of a pushback, if I may, please. My name is Mark. I'm the Chief Executive of the Children's Society. I just want to push back a wee bit on what Sir Ian has said. It's challenged us that the big charities don't do a lot on the ground. We work with 67,500 young people this year, and the data that we collect from that work allows us to see the areas of children's lives that are broken. That allows us then to create resources for teachers and schools, youth groups, faith groups right around the country to help protect young people from harm. This year, 94% fewer children will be arrested on trains carrying drugs or weapons because my team have trained every British Transport Police officer in the country to spot the signs of exploitation. So those kids will now get a safeguarding response rather than a justice response. Can we do better? Yeah, of course we can, absolutely. But I just want to challenge the view that big charities don't deliver change for their beneficiaries. And if I can make one final point, which builds on what Nigel has just said. When the pandemic hit and families around this country were in destitution, before furlough arrived, I met with a minister in the DWP, a Conservative minister, and I explained to him what my people were seeing on the ground. He said, what needs to change? I said, we need to get resource into the pockets of the poorest families in the country right now. He then created what has become known as the Household Support Fund, which put £1 billion into those families' pockets. But the minister then rang me up 6 months later to say, can you get me data to prove this works? So my crew put in freedom of information requests into every local authority in England and Wales, and we showed the results that that money had done. Today, 4 years on, £4 billion has gone into those families' pockets, and the current government have just put an extra £1 billion per year for the next 4 years. So yeah, we do, of course, need to do better, but I do want to push back that big charities don't deliver change. There's nearly 70,000 kids who will benefit from our work this year wouldn't quite agree with that.
Well, I always say if the cap fits, wear it. And the reality is that's not the case for all the charities that are at the top of that giving list. So absolutely, but you were set up in that area. My point is, if you're set up to do that down on the ground, then that is your charitable aim. There are lots of charities that were set up on other vaguer notions and end up literally keeping the money at the top end of things and have too much money invested in some of the things that frankly are nothing to do with their charitable interests. I make this point, it's an agitation, and it's one that we looked at in detail twice now. So, you know, I know you feel right, I have to defend that, absolutely quite rightly, but I'm always after the ones that are struggling to defend it, and that's the key point that I made.
Brilliant. I think the lady in front also had a question.
Thank you. Paige Portal, Senior Account Director at Henham Strategy. We're a public affairs and policy consultancy, and we work a lot on local economic growth, working a lot with MSAs at the moment, Mayoral Strategic Authority, sorry. I was just wondering, so Ian, you spoke about matched funding. Obviously, in March 2026, we've got this funding cliff edge with UK SPF ending. I was wondering what challenges you think that might bring for philanthropic investment, and also for the wider panel, what role you would like to see MSAs play when it comes to leveraging that investment. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, the simple point I would make to government, any government, is do none harm in this area and make sure you understand the effects that you might have on distorting the nature of where the money goes and how the giving works. So my caution would be in that. I would have to see how this plays out before we actually are critical on that position completely, but I do think that it's important. It's often the case with governments is that they act in a grand scale and then don't look at how that's working. And that's the point that I've been trying to make, which is big charities, big government needs to figure out who best delivers this for them on their aims, and are we doing something that's standing in the way of that proper access down to the bottom to the top. And I think that's the key question I would ask with the government is don't rush into this if you're not sure that what you're doing is actually going to help rather than harm some of the natural processes. You know, it's like gardening in a way. If you're going to dig up everything, but you're really only intending to dig up the weeds, that's not exactly the purpose. The purpose is the things that work, learn from them and don't get rid of them and don't do anything to harm them so you can then help the others that do it. And that's my simple principle. So we'll wait and see.
Point about match funding in there. Philippa, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I think match funding can be a really powerful tool. I think there's evidence that it shows that people give 2.5 times as much if they know the funding, if the donation is going to be matched. And when it's sort of well considered and targeted, and particularly for the charities thinking about it being long-term support, I think it works really well. We had an example in the pandemic where we worked on a programme with funding from ABI, the Association of British Insurers, which was matched by DCMS, and that meant that it was a pot of over £100 million during COVID, which was going to support charities at a time when other funding streams maybe were a bit more challenged. And so where it is targeted, it's got clear aims, and the right people are involved in terms of wording it, making it a decision, I think it can be really, really powerful. Yeah.
I found a stat in our paper that Big Give, who obviously are phenomenal on the match funding front, found that 84% of people are likely to give more if there's a match funding opportunity. And so I think, Nigel, particularly as you said earlier, kind of looking for ideas and kind of open ears, I think something along the lines of match funding, if we're talking about getting more philanthropic money into charities, I think is a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the report, and I should say actually also want to get on record credit to Ian for the work he's done for decades in this area and civil society overall, but also the work CSJ is doing. It's really valuable, and I think you will see some of the recommendations in there in the next manifesto, and really appreciate that. I'd probably just make one comment here about the whole ecosystem, about policy development, because you all know, because it's been a big debate, whether even DCMS exists. And one of the issues we've got for the charitable sector and civil society is where it fits within government, and therefore what influence it has over policy development. Because in the past, little bits in the Cabinet Office and all sorts of places. And there is a real concern about the weight and influence of DCMS overall, and in particular the civil society team, who I used to work with really closely, even within DCMS, what influence and say they have. And it's really important, because I don't think we've ever got it right, because the reality is that the civil society element, in particular charities, then fits across every single other departmental area. Think about the health charities. Who are they lobbying? And they're coming in, and they used to come and lobby me, whereas actually the more appropriate thing was probably the Department for Health. So we've still not got it right in terms of the structure of government, the structure of decision making, and where civil society and the charities sector sits within government as well, which is why actually coming up then, and external bodies and charities themselves coming up with policy recommendations is really important. But the painful thing that you all face, and I think you do on a daily basis, is you then have to go and speak to about 5 or 6 different ministers across multiple departments in order to get your message across. And DCMS doesn't always carry the weight with the Treasury that it probably should. Sorry to be a bit of a downer there, but it's harsh reality. Yeah.
No, that's true.
Any more questions? The Treasury. Lady at the front here.
Also from PBE. One of the things that we did previously was around getting the FCA to include philanthropy as a question that was kind of part of their offering when speaking to advisors. Something we pushed on for quite a fair bit, encouraging it, and then some people wanted it to be a compulsory question that was asked as part of it. Pushback from FCA was that it wasn't within their remit, and DCMS were basically saying that we would encourage it, but we can't make it permanent. I just wanted to hear some reflections on that, if it's worth something that we should keep pursuing, or if there's any other better policy levers to encourage philanthropy.
Philippa, CAF have been very big on this.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And I guess the point we talked about the US earlier, as Ian mentioned, I think this is linked to part of the fact that in the UK we don't talk about philanthropy a lot, and obviously in the US it's different. It holds a different cultural space. In the US, I was there last week, the way they talk about it is just very different, and it's just that encouragement of being more open about it. Our UK Giving Report shows that when people talk about the giving that they do, it encourages other people to do that. So I think that's linked to that reticence, even in the advisor space, of having that conversation. But yes, we definitely are very pro. I mentioned that confidence level of 5%, and I mean, that's just that's too low. And especially because we know we're coming up to this great wealth transfer where the younger generation are going to inherit over the next 30 years a really significant amount of money. They're a different kind of generation. They will want to talk about it. And so I think being equipped to have that conversation is really, really important. So I think we should keep going. Yeah.
Great. I think the lady here had a question.
Hi, Kate from the Society of London Theatre and UK Theatre. Given the lack of funding for the arts, particular the dire need for capital investment in our arts venues, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how we incentivise philanthropy for the arts. For example, I think in Italy and France they've had quite a lot of success with a cultural philanthropy tax credit.
Nigel, do you want to go first on that?
Look, I think one of the things to say, look, the role of the National Lottery and the distribution bodies of the National Lottery is absolutely pivotal here, and they've made so much of a positive impact over the last 30 years. But the distribution amounts has not changed since the original inception. And I think it's fair to say, do we need to look at that again at some point in terms of the percentages going to different bodies? Because there is a different impact, and I think that's something that we need to have a proper debate on. And then more broadly, it kind of looped back to the kind of response a minute ago. We've got something cultural in here. If you look at the US, it really is fascinating. The way that you get some really big, generous givers, and they're applauded, and they're recognised as doing, well, you often get a name on the building or something as well, but there's some credit there. We still culturally have something against wealthy people, and really, really successful wealthy people. and they're almost taught down. Whereas in fact, actually, if encouraged, cajoled, or indeed tax incentives in place, they can do so much positive for society. But if we don't recognise, applaud, and thank them for it, then surprise, surprise, we often don't get it. And certainly when it comes to arts and so on as well, often if you look at the philanthropic giving in the US, the sums are amazing compared to the UK. I mentioned the National Gallery's really incredible achievement recently, though again, some of that was from a charitable body, but some of it from individuals. It really is quite remarkable. So there's a lot to learn internationally here, and I say I'm quite open. There was a thing I read the other day that was really interesting. Apparently, when one of Margaret Thatcher's goals in the 1980s, and of course we took the Conservative Party conference, 100 years Margaret Thatcher's birthday, it's really interesting that apparently one of the things she thought would happen directly, immediately, from reduction in tax is a direct consequential increase in philanthropic giving and charitable giving, and it didn't actually happen. And I think that's something we've got to consider as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. We are nearly out of time. I thought I might give our panellists kind of a final word before we wrap up, and I will go from left to right. Philippa.
Great. Yeah, well, it's been a really interesting discussion, I think, and I think it's really important to think broader than just the UK. I know that when government does have in place encouraging measures to encourage the public to give. We've seen it in other countries when we look across the world. People tend to give 1.7 times more than in countries where they don't. So I think getting it right, getting these things right, getting the right bouquet of incentives and encouragements and things could really, really be powerful at a time when charities across the country of all sizes really, really need that support.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add is say thank you for doing today's event, and thank you for everybody coming along and being online as well. When I said at the beginning, and my opening comments we've got an open mind, I do mean it. I will be setting up various advisory panels and having brainstorming sessions on policy development across each of the DCMS sectors, including the charities and civil society, because I know you've spoken to Stuart before, beforehand as well. So I will get that going again, probably this side of Christmas. So many of you in the room, don't be surprised if you get an invite, and please come along. Yeah.
Great. I will actually say one thing as well in closing, which is to the previous point about the culture of philanthropy. And one of the proposals we put in here was to appoint a philanthropy champion, someone who is sort of government appointed but isn't, civil servant, and can sort of embody that kind of philanthropic kind of drive that we want. I think that would potentially help, with that sort of whole culture of slightly thinking about philanthropy as is it a shady thing, is it a tax thing? Actually, if we can celebrate philanthropy in that way and have a person who kind of sits within or appointed by government but is seen from the outside, or from philanthropists themselves, that's the person I can go to if I want to engage with government on some match funding opportunities and that sort of thing. I think that would be a real help.
Absolutely. Actually, Nathan, if I can, just one thing. I've got my session this afternoon at 3:15 on the main stage. But we've got it open to debate, discussion about the importance of DCMS sectors and what the policy development should be. So any of you who've made questions or comments today, come and say them again, and it'll be live on telly later this afternoon. And or, if you leave the room and think, I didn't say that, you've got the second bite at the cherry this afternoon at 3:15.
Fantastic plug. Love that. Jadwiga.
Yeah, just thank you for inviting me today. I mean, hopefully I've been able to demonstrate the impact that philanthropic funding has given to our charity. And I also wanted to point out as well is I know that my team worry we're going to get too big and that we'll become lost in a big charity. We have no intention of getting that big that we lose sight of our families. I want to make sure that we stay small and connected. In fact, the goal I've got is I've got to be able to drive within half an hour to the next site so that I can know my families, being the head of the charity, so I can know their names and I can build relationships with them in the way we began and in the way we intend to keep on going. So,
excellent.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ian, final word to you.
Well, I think, first of all, thanks everybody for coming. It's an interesting debate. It's the debate that always gets brushed to one side, really, when other issues are around. It is, however, core to how many of our communities work and how you solve so many problems. The good ideas, as I said earlier on, come from the ground up, not the other way around. The days of smart guy joining a think tank and scribbling policy out without ever talking to anybody at the bottom of the chain is really over, and therefore learning from organizations such as we see here today is very important, because it's the change that matters, and the only way that happens, of course, if they have the money to carry on working. So I do come back to the single point. We really do need to have a massive rethink about taxation and the voluntary sector, the charitable sector, because it's not right, it doesn't work, and organizations at the bottom end of the chain don't really know how they can access money, and the payback for those at the top of the chain who want to give their money still isn't great enough, and I think we need to make sure you match those two things. And the one thing for governments constantly to remember is when things work in the small community groups and charities, that means it costs them less at the top end of government.
Yep.
That has to be clear to them.
Brilliant. Ian, thank you. Thank you all for coming this morning. Thanks to those who joined online. And a big thank you to our panellists.
Thank you.